Hello, and welcome to Spotlight On, the podcast that brings together business leaders, entrepreneurs, and experts covering a range of topics. I'm Nicholas Barton, founder and CEO of the Barton Partnership. We're an award-winning executive recruitment and consulting solutions firm providing permanent search and independent consulting services across strategy, sustainability and M&A, data and analytics, and transformation and change. In today's podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by Ted Bililies, Partner and Managing Director of the Global Transformative Leadership Practice at AlixPartners, and author of the article Private Equity Needs a New Talent Strategy, which was published in the Harvard Business Review. Ted is an internationally recognized expert on leadership and organizational development. He advises investors, CEOs, and boards globally to help them select the right leaders for key roles and to position those leaders and their teams for maximum value creation. Ted is often consulted on challenging succession issues and when boards of directors need to make strategic leadership change. Ted, great to have you with me today. Thank you for joining me on this discussion. Really, really excited about exploring this topic with you. I mean, on the back of your article, which, as we've talked about, has received a lot of attention. It's certainly in relation to the conversations we've been having. As you know, the Barton Partnership has a strong focus across the private equity community. So I think when I saw the article, firstly, it really resonated with me. And secondly, on the back of conversations we've been having with key stakeholders in private equity, everyone could identify with some of the key topics that you've brought out. So I was really keen to get you on this discussion today. Let me fire into the first question. So obviously this article, as we talked about, private equity needs a new talent strategy, highlights a pivotal shift towards a heightened focus on leadership and talent management, as we talked about. So from your perspective, how can PE firms effectively adapt to this change in a rapidly evolving economic landscape?
Well, Nick, thank you, first of all, for inviting me on your podcast. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be here. The article did receive a lot of attention. I'm glad to know you received some positive feedback on it. I think this is a very, very timely issue for many reasons. There are very strong headwinds, as we all know, for the private equity sector these days. Certainly 2023 has been no walk in the park for the sector. We've been dealing with high interest rates, which raises the hurdle rate on exit. It makes getting the best deals really challenging and exiting them in the right way. It really challenges what is the essence of private equity, which is accelerated value creation. It sort of takes that accelerated part and really slows it down. So in answer to your question, how to adapt to this landscape, I think that talent and leadership have been an under-recognized and underutilized lever for accelerated value creation. And now you're seeing some of the players in the field really picking that up and sensing that and looking to make the most of it.
And, in terms of how the firms have really been adapting across this, have you seen any organizations that have been more successful than others so far?
Well, I don't want to be naming names because that might take us down a challenging road. I will say, though, that the firms that have very large portfolios, so now we're not talking about even 1 or 2 billion. We're talking about hundreds of billion in the portfolio. Those mega funds are starting to figure this out. And one way in which they're taking steps to address this under-pulled lever of value creation is to have human capital partners that are sitting next to the deal partners and operating partners on the PE side that are building leadership and talent assessment and alignment right into the value creation thesis in each potential deal. So right at the stage of due diligence, Nick, they are bringing in specialists in this area that are incorporating talent assessment into the due diligence process, baking it into the value creation thesis from the get-go, not as an afterthought. That's just one example.
Yeah, and we're seeing that as well. I mean, we've seen obviously a huge surge in that regard, as we've talked about sort of talent professionals within PE firms and human capital partners. The impact that they're having, as you say, is profound. Just evolving that, though, when you think about the profile of that individual, the capability, the skill set, what do you see, I guess, when we think about these human capital partners now that are now evolving and emerging within private equity? What does good look like, I guess, in terms of that individual? What are some of the key characteristics that you're noting for people to be successful in that role?
It's very much a threading the needle kind of role because you need somebody who, and this is why they're just a few successful ones, and they have different backgrounds. Ultimately, we're building towards a man or a woman who really understands organization development right? What you're really trying to do with that human capital partner, you're not just trying to get, an expert like you, Nick, into a portfolio, someone who can run the searches or find the best people. This is not about the star system. This is about really building a farm team. So you want someone who understands about organization development, who obviously understands how to recruit and retain the very best talent, but then who can help portfolio companies create the systems, whether that's in talent assessment, whether that's in performance management and rewards, whether that's in leadership development, that can really create a pipeline of talent in the portfolio company and even ideally across portfolio companies. So who has the right background to be
Yeah.
able to do that? Well, theoretically, they could come from search, they could come from behavioral psychology, graduate programs, they could come from HR, of course. It's not so much where they trained, it's what they're capable of doing, because at the end of the day, they have to face off with the deal partner. They have to face off with some very strong personalities. And so they cannot cave in to those personalities. They have to hold their own and say, look, talent and leadership is a valid area of value creation. And it's just as important as our cybersecurity. It's just as important as our, financial reporting. It's just as important as, our competitive landscape. So they're unique individuals who have to bring a lot of skill to that position.
And it's interesting because, the concept of this isn't new. Certainly within FTSE listed multinational organizations, the concept of what we're talking about is new, but it's interesting how private equity is now adopting this and seeing the real opportunity for value creation. Has that surprised you at all?
It seems to be taken more seriously now. We're still in the early innings. We're still in the beginning phases. Just appointing a human capital partner, for example, or saying, look, in our portcos, we want to have a more developed HR leader. We want to have a real CHRO in each one of our portfolio companies, which is another recommendation that I would make. Just saying it and then actually making it real are two different things. But I do think that with the cost of carry, with the fact that there aren't that many freestanding companies to buy, with the fact that many companies have already been private equity owned, they've already had all their costs taken out of them. They've already had operational improvement. Private equity investors now are saying, look, leadership effectiveness, and this came out of our latest PE leadership survey, 70% of private equity investors said leadership effectiveness is the number one lever of value creation. The challenge, the $64,000 question is, how do we actually unlock that?
Yeah. Well, let's move on to that. So you're an advocate for a leadership playbook in PE firms. What's your view on the essential components that these playbooks should include to be effective then?
Well, it should be a playbook. It shouldn't be a rigid model that's applied, but there should be at least 3 chapters in the playbook. The first one is how to do proper leadership and talent assessment. And that should be obviously in the due diligence phase, but it should be repeated all along. And those results should be seen at the board level. The board twice a year should be demanding rigorous objective assessment measures on all the key roles, on all the key people in the organization. The second chapter should deal with leadership development and succession planning. This is an evergreen process. This is not a back of the envelope process. So you need to know which are the key roles in your organization that are value creating. Who are the incumbents? Are they an A, a B, or a C? And who are the candidates? And when will they be ready to take those positions? That's an active process. That's chapter 2. And chapter 3 is, how are we managing our performance? How are we shaping performance management tools? And are they aligned with compensation? Increasingly, particularly in digitally oriented companies, Nick, as you know, value is created at multiple levels. So again, one of the longstanding habits of private equity is to load up equity on the top 3, 4, maybe 5 executives in the company, when in fact there's somebody a couple layers down that is just as critical, perhaps more critical to the ultimate success. So you need to understand where value is created in the organization, manage performance, and then reward that performance.
Great. So, Ted, in your experience, what are the key challenges when it comes to cultural integration within portfolio companies during roll-ups and platform deals? And how does this align with the increasing emphasis on building a unified leadership approach?
The importance of culture can't be overstated, Nick, and I'll give you a few reasons why. I mean, culture will largely drive attraction and retention of talent. And this is where in North America and in Europe, the demographics and the statistics are rather similar. There's still a war for talent. There's still a scarcity for talent, even though we're reading headlines, particularly in the last few months, about particularly in tech companies, big layoffs. The fact of the matter is, in the United States, the unemployment rate is still 3.8%. So there's a war for talent. That's point number one. Point number two is that 50% of the workforce in North America and Europe, roughly speaking, are Gen Z and younger millennials. That number is just going to increase. And those folks are communicating about their job satisfaction constantly over social media. So good experiences at work and increasingly bad experiences at work are being shared constantly. And so if you're in the business of wanting to grow, which is the essence of private equity, and you grow by attracting the best and retaining the best people, then that's really a cultural matter. That's really something that culture drives more than anything else, because your workforce is, which you're increasingly competing for, is communicating constantly one another about their experiences. That is fundamentally a leadership and culture issue. We like to say that leadership and culture are two sides of the same coin. So, we worked with one company with an electronics manufacturer who brought in a new CEO who basically replaced the founder, threw away the values, if you will, of that, founder-led organization, brought in terrific salespeople and really buckled down, but lost all the best talent because the culture had eroded, right? So and I'm sure you've seen this in other situations. Culture is more important now than ever because it is that critical link to attracting and retaining talent.
Where does the ownership of aligning culture sit? Within the individual portfolio companies, or at the top with the private equity fund that's actually driving the value?
Well, I think it's both, right? It's at every level, and of course, let's not forget the operators, the CEOs, the CFOs, the CHROs that really need to come together. The very best private equity firms bring their CEOs and C-level executives together at least once a year, the best ones twice a year. And they talk about these things. They talk about, these frustrating topics like culture, which are so hard to quantify yet so essential to have a discussion about. And they say, well, gee, we have such an array of portfolios. I mean, how could we possibly talk about culture? And surprise, the conversations are actually quite similar. The challenges are actually quite similar. I would also say that having a real HR function in your portfolio company. So PE talks a lot about professionalizing management. The best example of that is going from an HR administrator to a chief human resources officer. This is something that I talk a lot about with a person I admire a lot, Johnny Taylor, who's the CEO of SHRM, the Society for Human Resource Management. They're a global member-led organization, I think 300,000 members for human resources. And this notion of elevating the human resource function and having that drive things like culture and talent retention is absolutely essential. So PE investors are realizing this. They're realizing that HR isn't just an administrative function. It has the potential to be very powerful, if not the most powerful, value creating function in the portfolio.
Absolutely. And we're in the work that we're doing, clearly they play a critical and pivotal role, certainly in attracting and retaining the talent that we're working with as well. Ted, we've touched upon this, but I'm keen just to explore this a little bit more. When we talk about peer-to-peer learning networks, which are becoming increasingly vital within PE leadership development, how do you see these networks shaping leadership dynamics within complex PE structures? Now, just to reference an answer you gave just a second ago, you said the best companies that you're working with will gather their human capital CHRO individuals twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
If we elaborate on that, what else, are they doing, and what are some of the tools that they're using to align their business more effectively as well?
Yeah, this is such an undermined and under accessed advantage. When I say the very best companies are doing this, they're just starting to do this. So bringing together the heads of one function, or we've done custom made day long and day and a half long programs for CEOs and CHROs together. So the CHRO and the CEO will travel together, let's say into New York from 14, 15, 16 different portfolio companies. But then in between those in-person meetings, we will leverage the video conferencing technology. And every other month, there'll be organized by topic, a meeting for CHROs or a meeting for CEOs. Now, from my perspective, Nick, from my vantage point, this is starting to get popular. This is starting to gain ground, but the firms are still in the minority on this. Again, the rather large ones are doing this more frequently. And that knowledge sharing, that peer-to-peer network is extremely powerful. I've gotten the sense from some members on the deal team that they're kind of threatened by sometimes bringing together, management teams. I've never seen anything negative about it. It's only been positive. And it really, private equity, says we want to partner with our management teams. We want to support them. This is a key way of doing that, which needs to be really advanced. It really needs to be expanded because it's not happening enough.
I mean, I'm really curious. This event that you hold, what does the program look like for the CHRO specifically? What do you cover in these topics?
Well, not surprisingly, 6 weeks before, we'll do a short survey of the potential attendees. What's on your mind? What do you need to find out about? Sometimes it's intensely practical. How are we going to manage through inflation? How are we going to be managing our going into bonus season? How should we be, figuring these things out? Sometimes it's exchange of tools, it's exchange of ideas. Many times we'll work with the deal partners, identify in your portfolio companies a center of excellence in each one of them, and we'll reach out to them and say, would you be willing to do a 20-minute presentation? You've just been complimented by your board as being a role model in this area. Would you present to your peers? And people feel very flattered to do that. Meanwhile, they're sharing that kind of information. This is such an untapped area of learning and value creation that I don't know why more private equity firms aren't doing it, but we're doing this, every week almost for our private equity clients.
No, fantastic. So we've observed a growing significance of succession planning in private equity. How can private equity firms better plan for leadership transitions to sustain growth over longer holding periods?
This is an essential question. I mean, we're pretty much it's in the rearview mirror now. Hold periods of 3 years or 4 years, and then flip the company because of inflation, because of cost of capital, because of the things we've been talking about. Holding periods now are averaging between 5 and 6 years, and there are many that are longer than that. And so now you really have to think about, there's not going to be one person in one role, any longer. There's going to be turnover, and of course, at the C level, that can be very, very destabilizing. So this is chapter 2 of the playbook, right? It's leadership development and succession planning. That's another reason why you need a very capable CHRO in your portfolio. There should be an inventory of talent, an inventory of the skill sets and the abilities that you have in the organization, and that what you're going to need for exit. So you always start with the end in mind. You always start with the exit. You work backwards. What are the value creating roles? Who are the incumbents, and who are now less than a year, 1 to 2 years, or 2 or more years ready to take that spot? And what are we doing to develop the skills of those individuals? That requires a CHRO with real talent experience, and it requires a CEO and a private equity board member to hold that CHRO accountable for doing that kind of planning. And basically, we need to be able to say, look, every value creating role in our company, do we have a replacement for? Are they ready now? Are they ready later? When are they going to be ready? And what are we doing to get them ready? That can be a huge talent attraction for new employees, because you're actually saying to them, you're saying to prospective employees, come to us, we're going to help you develop your career. We're taking an active look about where people like you can go in our organization. It's also a tremendous way when it's time for you to exit. Let's say you're selling to another private equity company or another buyer, you can say, here's our talent. We've been developing that talent all along. Here are our programs. That is value creation. So it's a very, very valuable thing to be doing that many PE companies are starting to do, but there's a long way to go.
Yeah, I'm sure. And finally, considering the evolving landscape of private equity and leadership, what key trends or changes do you foresee in the next few years that private equity firms and their portfolio companies should be preparing for now?
I really think the war for talent is not going away. And I think that one of the things that I study are intergenerational differences in leadership.
Yeah.
So what you or I may have required of the leader of our company, Nick, when we were coming up through the ranks is so different than what a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old or even a 35-year-old is requiring now. We see this in our leadership studies all the time. When even 5 years ago, when we would sample, PE and operators, they emphasize things like adaptability and flexibility in communication in CEO qualities, for example. Now we're looking at the generations that are requiring their leaders to take very strong stands on political issues, on inclusiveness, on diversity, on caring about health, mental health, and physical health of their employees. And as I say, they're communicating this constantly on LinkedIn and Glassdoor and various, social networks. So for leaders to understand the demands of the people that they're leading, that is probably the single most fastest changing variable in the management landscape that I could identify right now. And if I had a nickel for every conversation I had like this with a 50-year-old, usually male CEO who looks at me kind of cynically like, oh yeah, I get that, but he really doesn't, I could retire. So I think there's a mindset change. I hate to use it's a well-worn phrase, but there's a mindset change that senior management, executive management needs to really understand that these are not the same employees that you were leading 15 or even 10 years ago. The world has changed. Their demands are different. And you really need to step up and engage with them authentically and engage with them in a way that is going to hold on to them. Because when you have a 3.8%, unemployment rate, you've got employees with a lot of options.
Fantastic. Well, Ted, thank you for your time today. It's been great having this conversation with you. And clearly, obviously, as we said at the start, this article has truly resonated with the private equity community. It's certainly the topic that's being discussed at the moment. It's great to get your insight on this. Thank you for your time today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Nick. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you.